So I'm getting ready for the show, compiling my charts and all that good stuff. And I was compiling the charts for the top 10 altcoins below Litecoin. I generate the chart and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I made a mistake with Ripple. It's off the chart. It's at like 150, almost $160 million today. That's just not possible. I go back to the source material, verify that it seems to be correct, and I'm like, what the heck happened with Ripple? And I start searching around looking for some magnificent new revolutionary technology in Ripple, or that they've taken over the country of England and they've made Ripple the new cryptocurrency standard for England. None of that happened. What actually happened with Ripple was they decided to change the coin supply from 8 billion coins to 28 billion coins per dictum. And this has created an increase in the overall market cap because the market has not caught up to this fact. It leads me to wonder, are we talking about a cryptocurrency here, or are we talking about a central bank?
Welcome to Dark News.
Dark News.
Oh, shit. They'll never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves.
BBC posted their first article about Silk Road and Tor. Oh, I don't have to go to the street corner and get shot?
I think Bitcoin means 1,000 Silk Roads.
This is a show about cryptocurrencies,
anonymity, and uncensorship.
Today is August 28th, 2014, and you are watching Dark News with your host, Kristov Atlas. Today we will be covering the usual market prices and talking about a couple stories. We'll be talking about the federal government and how they're keeping us safe from terrorism and stopping bad actors like child pornographers. It's all about the great success of the state for today. If you enjoy the show, you can tip the show by sending some coins to the QR codes on your screen. We accept Bitcoin tips, Darkcoin tips, Dogecoin, and all manner of cryptocurrencies. And of course, we have a Patreon account too, where if you want to shed your dirty war dollars on a monthly basis to support the show, you can go through Patreon and do that as well. And your support is hugely appreciated. So let's take a look at the market prices for today. These are the market prices for August 28th. So the combined precious metal and cryptocurrency market cap gained about 1% in the last week, rising from $7.27 trillion to $7.36 trillion. Now, a viewer of the show last week asked some questions about the price table that we show on a weekly basis. He asked about the millibits per dollars figure, which is correct despite his questions. But he also said, this figure about precious metals seems quite strange. And lo and behold, when I went back and took a look at the figures, I did make some mistakes. So the way that we calculate the value of precious metals is I take the standard market price for gold and silver, and silver usually sitting around $20 or so these days, and gold sitting around maybe $1,200, $1,300. We multiply that by the estimated above ground reserves of those metals. Usually this market cap is calculated based on paper trading of gold and silver IOUs, but I think this is a quite misleading figure. I'm only really concerned with the actual metals that exist in reality. Much like with Bitcoin, you're concerned about how many Bitcoins have been mined and not how many Bitcoin derivative IOUs someone could hand you. You'd much rather have a Bitcoin than a Bitcoin IOU. The cryptocurrency market cap, that's Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies that are exchanged around the world, that actually dipped a little bit in the last week, just a 0.2, 0.3%. And Bitcoin dropped relative to the dollar, maybe about 2% in the last week. You can now buy 1.96 millibits with every US dollar. Darkcoin had a pretty tough week. Since 1 week ago, the value has lost about 66% relative to the dollar. It's still up. It's about 60% since we start tracking on the show, but it has sank to number 9 on the cryptocurrency market cap rankings, below Namecoin and Dogecoin. Anoncoin lost a little bit of value this week, now sitting at number 62 and lost about 14% to the dollar. Fedora Coin lost no traction, but is now sitting at number 154. A pretty good week on the other hand for the crypto note currencies. Bitcoin, the dollar lost 20% relative to the Bitcoin. That means an increase for Bitcoin, now sitting comfortably at number 16. And Monero gained about 6%, now sitting at number 11 in those cryptocurrency market cap rankings. Clocoin slipped a little bit down to number 39 and lost about 5% relative to the dollar. And X currency still sitting at number 15, slotted comfortably there. 22 LR rounds, a bit more expensive this week. You can now only buy 11 of them with every US dollar, and mostly not changed for the other types of ammo that we track on the show. So let's go back to this altcoin market cap graph. Let's ignore Ripple for a moment. In fact, I want to ask people, what do you think about just dropping Ripple from this chart? If it's going to be able to make these kind of fiat changes to the supply of the cryptocurrency overnight, and it's going to skew the rest of the cryptocurrencies, is there really any point in keeping Ripple on these graphs? I'm not so sure that it is, but please chime in with your thoughts. You can do that on Twitter, or you can leave a comment in the video on YouTube, of course. Now, aside from Ripple, BitShares X had a pretty excellent week, nearly doubling in just the last week, and now plummeting towards $80 million in market cap. It was sitting below $40 million last week. Next, down just a little bit this week in Purecoin, mostly lateral. If we zoom in and look at the logarithmic view of things, we can see that Darkcoin bit the dust a little bit this week and made safe, moving sideways, Dogecoin sideways, Namecoin sideways. Monero up a little bit. BitShares PTS down a little bit, but not nearly as much as BitShares X was up. Bitcoin Dark had an excellent week. It's almost as if Bitcoin Dark has eaten the sandwich of Darkcoin in the past week. A little bit of an improvement for Counterparty as well. So that will do it for the prices for this week. Now let's get into a couple stories. So the US federal government, among many things, keeps us safe from terrorists and child pornographers and organized crime. And so I figured we'd take a look at some of the examples of how well it's doing. This story comes to us from Salon.com. It's an interview between Joshua Holland and Trevor Aronson, who has been researching the FBI's attempts to foil Al-Qaeda and other terrorist plots over a 10-year period between 9/11 and the preceding 10 years. So I'll just read a couple of little excerpts from this interview. Joshua asks, Trevor, the raw statistical data say that Americans have a significantly better chance of being struck dead by lightning than by being killed in a terrorist attack here at home. It's obviously different for some people in other countries. I got that from the official terrorism statistics put out by the FBI and related agencies. They also track foiled attacks. These agencies say that the foiled attacks prove that they are saving American lives. And surely, if it weren't for the FBI, Americans would just be dying in droves to terrorism instead of a lightning. And Trevor says, well, I'd say the majority of the foiled attacks that they cite are only foiled because the FBI made the attack possible. What? No, that can't be right. Most of the people who are caught in these so-called foiled attacks, I don't like the way that this guy is talking about the FBI. It's making me very uncomfortable. They're caught through sting operations that use either undercover FBI agent or an informant posing as some kind of Al-Qaeda operative. In all of these cases, the defendants or the would-be terrorists are people who have, at best, a vague idea that they want to commit some sort of violent act or some sort of act of terrorism, but have no means to do it on their own. They don't have weapons, they don't have connections with any international terrorist groups. Well, that's very confusing to me because the FBI has been telling us that They've been keeping us safe from these dastardly terrorists, their terrorist masterminds with dirty bombs and underwear bombs and shoe bombs and mall bombs and all kinds of bombs. But this guy seems to be saying that the FBI is in fact providing fake bombs to losers that are vaguely interested in terrorism. That doesn't seem to fit together. So the researcher goes on, there was a little bit more than 500 defendants who were charged with federal crimes involving international terrorism. About 250 of those were charged with things like immigration violations or lying to the FBI, and who are somehow linked to terrorism. Their charges did not involve any sort of terrorist plot. Out of the 500, you have about 150 who were caught in sting operations. These were operations that were solely the creation of the FBI through an FBI informant or undercover agent, providing the means, the opportunity, the bomb, the idea, and so on. And if you're being really generous to the FBI, I guess, you can find only about 5 people out of the 500 charged with international terrorism who were involved in some sort of plot that either had weapons of their creation or the acquisition or were connected to international terrorists in some way. This include Najibullah Zazi, who came close to bombing the New York subway system, Faisal Shahzad, who delivered a bomb to Times Square but that didn't go off, Jose Padilla, etc. So these are the 5 that you can point to after 9/11 who seemed to pose a significant threat. None of them were successful. That's a handful compared to the more than 150 who were caught in sting operations. And in these sting operations, the men never had to access to actual weapons. It was only the FBI that provided it as part of the sting operation that they were controlling from beginning to end. Well, this really changes my perspective. I mean, we've been putting billions of dollars into fighting terrorism domestically and globally, and I thought it was money well spent, but they're saying that there was maybe 5 people that they actually foiled, and then a bunch of people that they set up through sting operations, and then just people that were breaking rules like moving from one landmass to another. The interviewer asks, I'm no attorney, but that sounds close to entrapment. Have defense attorneys raised that? And the guy that he's interviewing goes on to say, well, yeah, it sounds like entrapment to a layman, but it's a bit different when it comes to terrorism. If it was a bank robbery or something like that, the government would have to prove that the defendant was researching bank robberies, casing banks prior to the FBI informant getting involved, etc. Otherwise, it would be entrapment. But when it comes to terrorism, the bar seems to be quite a bit lower. For example, the government will often cite that someone watched a jihad video, and they'll put on stand a government that will testify that, hey, because he watched the jihad video, this is one of Al-Qaeda's classics, and that meant he was going to become a terrorist. And so the rest of the sting operation, providing him with a plan, with the means, with the money and so forth to actually do something violent, that's not entrapment, because if you watch a single jihad video, then translate, you become a terrorist. This researcher goes on to say that seems a bit ridiculous because he himself and the person interviewing him and many others have at various times watched these videos in part of their research. So watching a video does not seem like very good evidence of an intent to commit a crime. Interviewer asks, how much do you think this tendency to entrap, so to speak, these people comes from the imperative to justify bloated counter-terrorism budgets? And the research says actually a lot. The reason why we're seeing these really aggressive sting operations is a result of something of a bureaucratic evil. That is, every year Congress allocates the FBI's budget, and they set the counterterrorism budget at $3 billion, which is the largest part of the FBI's budget. In other words, this has become the main mission of the FBI, more than it receives for organized crime and financial fraud. So the FBI can't exactly spend $3 billion and say, hey, look, we spent your money, but we didn't find any terrorists. Even though the truth is that there's a lot of money for counterterrorism and just not a lot of terrorists going around today. What happens is that these sting operations are a very convenient mechanism for the FBI to say, hey, look at us, we're keeping you safe. Okay, so maybe the federal government is not protecting us from terrorists. It's hard to think about that we're spending $3 billion, many billion dollars beyond that outside of the FBI on anti-terrorism. But look, they do cover other things. They protect us from organized crime and child pornography. And there's all these like sick people out there, and we need the government to protect us from child pornographers. Well, here's a story about child pornography. Federal Cybersecurity Director found guilty on child porn charges. Like he must have like testified and found someone else guilty. As the acting cybersecurity chief of a federal agency, Timothy DeFoggy should have been well versed in the digital footprints users leave behind online when they visit websites and download images. Yes, I would say that's a pretty reasonable expectation for a cybersecurity chief. But DeFoggy, convicted today in Nebraska on 3 child porn charges, including conspiracy to solicit and distribute child porn, must have believed that his use of the Tor anonymizing network shielded him from federal investigators. He's the 6th suspect to make this mistake in Operation Torpedo, an FBI operation that targeted 3 Tor-based child porn sites that used controversial methods to unmask anonymized users. And we've talked about Operation Torpedo and similar efforts on the show before. This idea of trying to hack Tor users, taking over the providers of websites, not just for child porn, but even much more broadly, all kinds of websites on places like Freedom Hosting, delivering malware to Tor users and trying to de-anonymize them with this malware in a very broad fashion. We've talked about that before on the show, and so I guess this guy got caught up on that. So I guess my question would be, who is watching the watchers here? If the acting cybersecurity chief of the Department of Health and Human Services is found guilty of this stuff, who is actually supposed to keep us safe from it? I guess it's the FBI. Now, of course, the other possibility here is the government telling us that the government has found the government responsible for child porn. The other possibility is that perhaps Timothy DeFoggy did not do this. Perhaps he was going to be a whistleblower and found something that he didn't like going on in the government, was going to leak the information, and was threatened with some pretty bad consequences as a result of that. Perhaps he was framed for this crime. I'm sure we'll never really know. But that's another possibility as well, of course, because another part of the government is the National Security Agency, which, as far as we can tell, is basically a very expensive and powerful blackmailing organization that probably goes after politicians, both domestic and abroad. And we can easily imagine that they would have not only the ability to dig up dirt, but also to fabricate evidence against people that they don't like. So that will be it for today for Dark News. Thank you very much for watching. I think we'll be back to our normal schedule next Tuesday in early September. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about the latest dark market prices and the latest dark market action. We have over the weekend Open Bazaar coming out in beta. And so that should be very interesting to look at. Lots of things going on. Release of a new cryptocurrency recently, Bitcoin Dark. They just put out a white paper, which I've started going through. It's very interesting. So all kinds of stuff happening. It's a very active time and an important time to keep informed. So I hope I'm helping you out with that. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for supporting the show. And until next week, have a very dark week.